patrons, today we're going to be doing a bonus video and we're going to take a look at our art supply, which is sort of new to me but sort of not. And what that art supply is chunky acrylic paint pen markers. So you're probably familiar with the brand Posca, which seems to be absolutely everywhere and easy to find, but these are by the brand Liquitex, and I purchased them because I wanted to use them to do my pre-prepared backgrounds with in my sketchbook. And as I was picking them online and not seeing them in a shop, I really didn't get a true reflection of the colours that they were going to turn out as, and these colours are all far too bright for me. They're really saturated, and I was hoping that when they came they'd be much more muted versions of one another. And what I may well do with these is unscrew them and mix some white acrylic paint or acrylic ink in to dull them down, but for the meantime I wanted to have a go at making my own. So I've bought these empty markers. They came in a pack of 4 from Amazon, and you can fill them with whatever you like really. You could use ink, acrylic paint, mix and match the colours to your heart's content. They come apart like this. So you have the barrel with a couple of marbles in to help mix and agitate the paint as you shake them. This is the stopper that stops the paint oozing out of the top, although they're not completely foolproof. They will leak if you leave them upside down for a long period of time. And then the nib is a very rigid foam material. It's slightly larger, but only ever so slightly larger than the Liquitex, which I don't mind because these are for gestural mark making and not really for detailed work, and I'm very okay with that. And then obviously you've got the screw lid when you're done. Now, of course, as we're going to be making acrylic paint markers, we're going to need some acrylic paint, and there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You could literally take your tube of acrylic paint and thin it down with water and water alone, pour it into the barrel, and away you go. And that's probably the cheapest and the most straightforward way of doing it. Another idea would be to buy some pouring medium that you might have seen for paint pouring art, where you get a cup of lots of different colours of acrylic paint and upturn it onto a canvas, a plate, a soap dish, a coaster, what have you. And it will thin down the acrylic without actually diluting the colour or changing the saturation. But it has a bit more body to it than the water alone would, so the markers will come out a bit less runny. The first colour that I want to mix up, I'm actually going to start with my acrylic inks. So here we've got 2 inks which are actually the same mix of pigments. It is a multi-pigment colour. It's called Peach Pink, but it has previously been sold by the name Flesh, which I think they've phased out, so you could have older bottles with this. It's got Pigment Red 112, PY 3, PBK 7, PW White and PY 74. So you've got reds, yellows, black and white mixed in. Now the colours aren't exactly the same in the bottle, but I have to say that I've used these interchangeably, and once they're dry they look very much the same to me, so I suspect they are the same mix of pigments. But the colour that they produce, rather than being this sort of pale beige colour, goes actually quite a bit darker. It's closer to this but not quite so orange once it's fully dry, so there's quite a colour shift with that. And my thinking is, I've got 2 bottles of this, so no harm, no foul. I can have a go and have a play. I've also got an old bottle of white acrylic paint, acrylic ink, again by the brand Liquitex, and this is just titanium white. And as it's already pre-mixed and nice and runny, I thought we'd have a go at mixing these 2 together to try and firstly dull down the colour and see how we go with that. As I'm going to be making up my own shades as I go along, I've got a sketchbook here, which is a sketchbook I use regularly. It's an 8x8 Clairefontaine 100% cotton hot press paper, and I really love this book. It is beautiful for illustrating, but there is one very strange part of it that is I really can't decide why they would do this. So at the very back they've got these pages that are perforated to make these long skinny postcards, and it's something that I would never ever do. I'd never rip a bit out of my sketchbook and post it. The paper's thick for drawing on, but I really don't know how that would survive in the post without an envelope to protect it. So rather than waste these back pages of my sketchbook, I've devoted it to swatching. You'll see these swatches in the bonus video from month 1, so that I can have a representation of the supplies that I've got and how the colours look on a paper that I use regularly, and I can use up these otherwise wasted pages in the back of my sketchbook. So we're going to have a go on this today and see how we get along. Now what I'm going to do first is give both of these bottles a really good shake. I'm not sure how much I'm going to mix up. I doubt I'm going to fill the whole of that barrel to start with, because this is very much just an experiment, but we shall see how it gets on. So I'm going to shake them off camera. Right, so I've given them a really good sort of 30 seconds of shaking, and I'm just going to bring over one of my paint rags, which is freshly washed, but I think is going to get very, very messy. I've actually got some scrap paper, in fact. Let's pop that there. Put my rag to the side, and I'm going to start with the slightly paler of the two colours. But like I said, it does have quite a drying shift, and it looks a lot darker once it's dry on your page. So let's see. Like I said, this is an experiment. I'm familiar with paint markers. I've used them an awful lot. Initially, it was for hand lettering, and I used them an awful lot when I was bullet journaling all the time. And then when I went to work in hobbycraft, I had to do signage all the time, and we would use it for those signs a fair old bit. But I got a bit more adventurous over the last couple of years and started incorporating it into my artwork. I've been a lot braver with acrylics than I had before, and I thought, why not see how they play as a base on which to add things like my coloured pencil or Neocolour, and I find that they work really quite well. Now I've been using the little stopper that comes in this, but obviously I could pour this in because it's quite runny, but we'll see how it goes, being a little bit more cautious. Now I'm just going to have a good look at this white, because my studio is in the garden. It's a shed and there's no insulation. It is really quite chilly, and this had separated out, but I think it's mixed up enough that we'll get where we want to be. And here we go. Let's see. I'm actually going to add quite a bit of white, and I can see that I'm going to run out of the ink, but that's okay. Art supplies are here to be used. As I've got this supply, I'm going to make use of it, because I don't tend to use white ink an awful lot. I use other white media if I want an opaque white at the end of a piece than this. But yeah, we'll use up what I've got to start with, and then what I'll do is I've got plenty of white acrylic paint, and we'll thin it down one way or another until it's the consistency that I want, and we'll use that to mix with the other shades. Right, so I think I'm about 50-50 white and peach pink. So you can see the colours aren't mixed yet. What I think I'll do is I've got a wooden coffee stirrer, and I'm going to give it a mix, because I suspect if I start taking the inner funnely bit out and the nib off, it's going to get very messy very quickly. So let's see how we get on just mixing it by hand to begin with. So far so good. I haven't covered myself or my studio in paint. The day is young though, we shall see how that goes. Right, now if I just wipe off the excess, waste not, want not. Ooh, and the splattering begins, and I've headbutted the camera. Oh, it's going well. So I'm going to put the stopper back in, and that fits nice and snugly. And then I'm going to screw on the cap, figure out which way it goes first. I think it's in, yeah, so it is anti-clockwise, which makes sense because you will screw the lid on clockwise. Right, now I'm going to give that a good shake. And then I'm going to prime my pen. So actually we'll remove my little scrap. I'll use that again when we come on to the next colour. And all I'm going to do is press down until the ink starts seeping through. You can pump like mad, or you can be patient and wait for the paint to start flowing. And I can see it is making its way through the barrel. It's definitely coming. It's started already to saturate the foam of the tip. Happy days. Go on, let's give it a bit of encouragement. The first time you do this, it will take an age because that tip is very absorbent foam. So it's going to take quite a lot to get the paint soaked through the nib and then enough of it to be applied to your page. I'm nearly there, but not quite. It's quite exciting, really. Nearly there. See, it's almost fully saturated the nib. Right, there we go, we're through. So let's see what sort of colour we've got. There we go. It's starting to pill the paper a little bit, but that's okay. I normally wouldn't be doing multiple passes with it on this paper in any case. And actually what I think might be helpful is if I put a little swatch of the neat colour next to it that we've used. Obviously I don't need to swatch the titanium white, so I can get a sense of whether that's light enough for me or not. And actually that is a good amount paler. I'm really happy with that. Actually, the pen that kind of inspired this colour was this Posca, and it is a PC 8K. These are the largest nibs that Posca do in this pale beige colour. And as you can see, it is quite a bit thinner than the nib of my new freshly made paint pen. So you have to scribble away like that, and I don't always like the marks that that texture leaves behind, especially if I'm covering a whole page with it. So what I thought I'd do before we move on to that next colour is actually just pump out a little bit, and look, I'm really surprised. That is very damn close. I bet when they dry, it's going to be difficult to know the difference between these. So I'm very, very pleased that I've managed to recreate a favourite marker in the nib size I actually prefer. The next colour that I want in a big chunky marker is a nice pale blue. Now this one, this acrylic marker, I'll have to be careful with because I've just taken it apart, is labelled as light blue violet. It's pigment yellow 23, pigment blue 29 and pigment white 6. So it's interesting that it comes out so lilac-y, but there's a yellow mixed with ultramarine, which is interesting to me. But again, this is far too dark for my wants and desires. So I've removed the nib from this, and lo and behold, it's pretty much identical to the cheapy ones that I purchased on Amazon. So I think this is the way forward for me now. I shall be making my own colours and not paying Liquitex the extra bucks when I have a bucket full of acrylic paint to use up. Now, I appreciate you won't be able to tell, but looking into that barrel, I would say I've got about maybe a little bit more than a third, 2/5 of the barrel left of this blue ink. And what I think I will do, get my scrap paper again, and so the messiness begins. Let's get a new one open. Oh, I forget that it's counterintuitive. To stop you unscrewing it by accident, it goes the opposite direction when you're putting the nib on or taking it off than what you think it should do. But I digress. So I'm actually only going to pour in a little bit of that. And to save an unfortunate accident, I am going to replace the, in fact, I shall do a little bit of a swatch up here with the extra paint so that I've got an idea of what colour I started with. Right, there we go. Lid safely on and out my way. Like I said, we're going to use up this white Liquitex ink to begin with, and what I might do is, I'm getting a little bit impatient, is just pour it in. Now I think I'm going to need quite a bit to make it as pale as I want it. In fact, it looks like I'm going to use the whole jar on this, which is totally fine. There is a little bit left in there, so I'm going to put the lid back on and save that for when I only need a small amount in future. And let's give that a really good mix. It's definitely a red leaning blue, which makes sense because it's an ultramarine, but it is going too far to the red for my wants and desires. I'm kind of thinking more like a sky blue, which in my mind is more like a cerulean than an ultramarine. Now that white ink is a little bit more textured, so I'm just making sure that it's all mixed in. Those marbles do get in the way a little bit. And I think I'm going to add another colour in, and probably more white, because that is not as pale as I wanted it. And the colour is this Liquitex Prussian blue hue. It's a basic acrylic paint, and it is a PB15 based blue. So this does tend to lean more towards yellow, whereas ultramarine does tend usually to lean more towards red. And I think I'll pop a blob of that straight in. It's a very, very dark paint, so I'm not going to add too much, because otherwise I'll end up adding gallons of white to dilute it down. And actually, I will want more white, so I'm going to use my Pebeo white, squirt in a good glob, and mixy mix. And we'll see what that does for us. This is going to take a bit longer to mix already, I can tell, because of adding the acrylic paint straight from a tube rather than the ink, which is runny in nature. These acrylics, the Pebeo and the Liquitex Basics, are really quite heavy bodied, so I may want to add some water. And I have a tiny little funnel and a glass of clean water for the task if I need it. But we'll see how I go. Now you can see that has turned the blue straight away from the lilac-y undertone of the original marker, and I really, really like that, but I want it paler. So in we go with another blob of white. Mixy mix. This is really good fun. It's like being a little kid making science experiments with leftover toiletries from the bathroom. Maybe that kids don't do that anymore, but back in the 80s when I was a child, I was certainly left alone to mix chemicals in the bathroom, making magic potions from leftover toiletries from Christmas. Perhaps parenting is a bit more responsible these days. Okay, now I think I'm going to need to give this a really good shake, so actually let's clean off the edge of the lid, in with the stopper, which has a nice satisfying click in, and then I think I'll be brave and stick my finger over it, yeah, and just give that oh no, that was a bad idea, so don't do that. I'm here to do the experiments for you. So let me just clean that off. Now I've cleaned up a bit, but I've been shaking for a couple of minutes and it's still not mixing in quite well enough, and that's obviously because I've put the raw acrylic paint directly into the tube. So I am going to be brave and disassemble it one more time and see if I can mix it up with my coffee stirrer. You see the ink is already seeping into the foam nib. It's a really nice colour. Made a mess, may as well embrace it now, hadn't I? Right, let's clean that off. In fact, I'll use this old horrible rag, if I can, to get the lid off. That's it. There we go. And in with my spatula to scrape down the sides. So this is, do you know what, this isn't going to bother me too much because I'm not that bothered about having a totally homogeneous colour. I'm really happy with the blue that I've produced, but other people may want it thoroughly mixed before they start using the pen, and it looks like I'm not going to manage that terribly well with this coffee stirrer. As you can see that it's barely scratching the surface of it. So I'm going to call it a day on that, and we're going to do a nice big swatch. There we go, the colour's making its way down. This did take a lot longer, and for some reason more paint is coming out of this one than with the paler tone we made. There we go. Right, I think we have lift off. So let's see. Yeah, that's interesting. It looks like you do actually need it to be really quite runny to get a good flow of your paint, which to be honest surprises me. I wondered if the paints were overly runny, but it turns out I was wrong, which is totally okay. Making some marks, little stampy stamps. Epic. Well, I'm happy with that blue. I would like it a bit paler, but as I've overfilled this, I think I'm going to call it a day with that for now, and I'll use them a little bit, see how I get on, and I can always add and adjust to the markers at a later date. Right, for my next experiment, I've got an empty, this was an ice cream tub that I washed out and saved, and I have an old spatula which is all split now, so I am no longer using it in the kitchen. This is going to stay in the art studio. And what I thought is I'm going to mix up my colour in here, add some water or acrylic pouring medium until I get a more runny consistency, and then we shall use my dinky little funnel to fill up the empty pen barrel with. And what I'd like to start with is this Chromium Green Hue by Pebeo. I want a slightly mossier version. Oh not great noise. Than what we've got. And again, I want this a fairly light tone. So, there we go. What I thought might be a good mixer is some Naples Yellow hue, because I want to dull it down quite a bit. And then, of course, another good glug of white. There we go. So, mixy mix time. Let's see what shade this produces. And what it's done is it's produced the most beautiful pistachio green. I really, really love that. I just wish I'd mixed a little bit more. So in fact, let's do that. Let's put an extra blob of each of the paints in and hope that I can replicate the hue. Obviously this is hugely unscientific. It won't be like buying paint from an art shop where everything is carefully calibrated and mixed to precise recipes. This is very much by eye. So let's give that a mix, and then we'll think about thinning it down before adding it to our empty pen. That is a gorgeous colour. I really love that. Got another little tub with just plain tap water in, and I'll use my funnel to pop in a little bit. And we're going to look for a much runnier consistency than we had initially. And I am again going to try and not be too horribly messy and keep it inside the pot and not spray it all over my desk. Add in a little bit more water, so it's still more painty than inky in texture. And really I'm just using this to try and be neat. Obviously a funnel is not necessary if you're a normal human being. Right, I think that's going to look a lot better. That's a much better texture. It's still a bit thicker than the consistency of the ink. So try a little bit more water. I could do this all day. Yeah, that's much more like the ink consistency. Right, wish me luck. Hopefully I won't decorate myself with this. Famous last words, eh? Now, in with the funnel. I have a feeling I've mixed up way too much paint. So we'll maybe have some leftovers from this mix. Yeah, we're definitely going to have some left over. There we go. Just going to pop that in the paint pot for the time being. And you know the drill. Let's get mixing. Getting used to the counterclockwise turning. Give that a good shake. Yeah, I'm really happy with that one as well. That's a gorgeous sagey green colour. And as I made far too much paint to fit in this marker, I've actually poured the excess into that empty bottle of titanium white ink that I had left. It's not mixed perfectly, but I don't mind. That'll just add to more interest when it's being used, and I suspect it'll be a little bit whiter because there was more white in this remaining, but yeah, I didn't waste it. I'm saving this to use another day. Looking good. Now the final mix that I want to do is to actually make a super dark tone. So I have just been having a little fiddle off camera, and I've got out these 3 colours which I'm going to mix together to give me a very dark tone that is a kind of inky blue. So what I think we'll start with is some of the black, and I'm not going to mix too much because I don't want gallons of paint left behind this time. The magenta, we really only need a tiny little bit, so I may even just squirt a blob onto my coffee stirrer and start with that, because it won't take much to tip it into a dark purple, which isn't what I'm after. And then with the Prussian blue, I'm going to add a little bit more, but again I'll go cautiously this time and add more if I need to. There we go. Right, this stick is quite flexible, that's the only thing. Obviously a palette knife would work really well for this as well. So that is super dark. It's also super thick, so we're going to need to thin that down quite considerably. And I am going to bust out my pouring medium and just see what a difference it makes compared to the paint we used. Sorry, the water we used. Right, now I think this is going to be really quite runny. Let's have a go. Carrying on experimental styly. Now I think I've added more or less the same amount of paint as I have pouring medium, and initially it goes in looking quite milky, but the more you mix, the darker the tone becomes again. And I think this is actually quite close to the tone that I was after. What I was thinking of is that super dark ink blue you get in old-fashioned fountain pen writing. And I think we could even be there already. But again, this is way too thick, even with the pouring medium. So, just going to test the colour. Dab a little bit in there. Yes, I'm happy with that because it's not too bright blue. The pink is definitely helping. I could add a tiny bit more of the magenta, but I really am going to be cautious with that because I want this blue, not purple in essence. Right, let's have a little go. I don't think it's made much difference, to be truthful. So I'll be a bit braver, put another blob in, and I'm going to put my magenta away and stop myself from overdoing it. Right. Yeah, that'll do. I just want a dark tone to contrast with the lighter ones for when perhaps I'm doing a night scene or a dark animal. And that will certainly do the trick. What I am realizing is that the pouring medium is not really making it terribly pourable, and I am going to need to add some water to that. So if I grab my clean jar again, and mixy mix, and I'm hoping that this is going to be quite runny overall. What I might do, because I'm still concerned that that's not runny enough, is so that I don't end up pouring too much paint into the marker, I'm actually going to pour some plain water into it to start with and then add the paint on top. Get too much. There we go. I've added maybe not quite an inch worth of water in the bottom, and oh, right, here we go. I can just see disaster about to strike with this. That's it. That is almost full. I'm not going to dare putting any more in. I do have a little bit of paint left over. But I think that is a better consistency. So shake, shake. And prime time. I like that. It's kind of Payne's grey, more so than fountain pen blue, but it is a dark tone, which is what I wanted. So there we have it. I've mixed up 4 colours and I've only got 4 empty pens at the moment, so that's as much as I can do today. I'm looking at my paint swatches, and whilst I'm very happy with the dark paint, I do feel that I could add more white into these. So what I'm going to do off camera is mix up a small pot of white paint with just plain water and then add it into the barrels of the paler shades to try and make them a little bit more pastel. But other than that, I'm super happy with my colours. I can see these being really useful for animals and their environments, which are my favourite subjects. And yeah, there we go. These are the final colours that we ended up with, and they're a little bit darker now that they're fully dried, and so I will add more white to the paler colours as I use the ink up inside the marker. But to make sure I didn't waste any paint, I used it in my sketchbook to paint some backgrounds, and this is a little masked trogon bird, which is from the Burb Fest challenge. If you've not found that yet, like I hadn't until this year, it's run every year on Instagram, and they post a bird a day for us to paint, and this is exactly what I would do with my acrylic pens. I would lay down a background and then go on top of it with other media to do my illustration. What I've been doing for Burb Fest is putting an illustration on the right and some text on the left, which has what I think are interesting facts about each of the birds that I've been drawing. Acrylic markers may be a relatively small part of my art practice, but they're a part that I wouldn't be without. They're very handy and save you getting out brushes, water and mixing up colours every single time you want an acrylic base to a illustration. It was great fun mixing my own colours and having a play with my art materials and feeling like I was using up the stacks of acrylic paint that I have that I don't tend to reach for on a day-to-day basis. I don't recommend that you use the pouring medium that I use, as it was far too thick to produce the ruddy enough ink that you need for the markers to flow nicely, but plain water seems to do the trick really nicely. I'll certainly be adding more empty markers to my next Amazon basket, and I will fill you in as I add other colours. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again for the next instalment. Bye!